Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for that third webinar of the Japan program on gender issues and soft power. And I am Valérie Niquet, and I am the director of the Japan program at Fondation for la Recherche Stratégique in Paris. And we are trying to build a dialogue between Japanese and European and French experts on many issues, usually very related to defense issues or strategic issues, and maybe gender balance and gender issues may seem to be quite far away from our usual field of interest. However, related to soft power, I think it is a major, very important issue. Soft power is part of the global power of any countries, and this is particularly true for Japan. And soft power is also a way to boost a country national image, which is part of the agenda of Japan today too. And it started quite a long time ago, but Japan is more and more part of the global strategic community, and soft power is an essential part of that strategy for Japan. And there is also that concept that we hear a lot about, linking democracies against autocracies, the concept of common values or shared values, that is extremely important. And of course, gender balance, a better gender balance between men and women is both in academia, officialdom, government, enterprises, business, etc., is very important. All democracies face issues in relation with soft power and the remaining important discrepancies between aspirational norms, be it in the context of gender balance, be it equal salaries, equal access to the job market at the highest level, fighting stereotypes, also extremely important in education, for instance, etc. All these points are essential, and progress can emerge through dialogue, as this is the case between what we are trying to do today between France and Japan. So to launch our dialogue on this very important issue, we have two speakers. The first will be Ms. Asako Osaki. She's director of Gender Action Platform, and she was a former UN development program on the promotion of gender equality. And then following, we will have Ms. MERITA BLAT. She is a gender expert at AFD, Agence Française de Développement. She was a civil servant working for the French Ministry of Women's Rights. Each of you will have approximately 15 minutes to make your presentation, 15-20 minutes. This is a 1-hour webinar, and then it will be followed by a short session of Q&A, and I will relay the questions. So I ask the people participating to that webinar to please put your comments or questions with the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and I will relay these. So please, Asako Osaki-san, please, I will ask you to start with your 15-20 minutes presentation. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much, and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for having me at this webinar, and I'm really delighted to be part of this discussion because I think, as Valérie-san pointed out very articulately, gender equality issue is a very important and timely topic. So I'm going to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes walking you through the current status of gender equality in Japan and also the recent developments. Yes. So I think it's particularly important because the gender equality is a goal, the global goal, and it is an essential part of the SDGs. And also in the context of G7, the gender equality has become more and more important. And now it's seen as part of the, what constitutes democracy. And this topic, I think, is particularly timely for Japan because, as you know, Japan has taken the G7 presidency as of the January 1st of this year, and the discussions are now taking place leading up to the G7 summit, which is going to be organized in May. So this question of how may gender inequality in Japan impact its soft power is a very interesting question for me as well. So I'm going to talk about gender equality status in Japan and the recent developments, particularly in the policy arena. And then I'm looking forward to the discussion from this particular angle of how gender inequality may impact Japan's soft power. Okay, so I'm going to start with the current status of Japan in terms of gender equality. I think you are pretty much familiar with the fact that Japan is ranked 120th out of 156 countries in terms of the gender gap. This is the data from 2021. And I think the latest report of the global gender gap index, Japan ranks 116th out of 145 countries, something like that. Okay, so we are doing very badly in political arena and also in the economy. I think you can see these data pretty much is pretty bad. And if you look at the women in parliament in G7 countries, we are way, way down. And I think this low percentage of women participating in parliament is the reason why we have so many gender issues still not unsolved. And when you talk about the status of gender equality or the existing gender gaps, I think this global gender gap index helps. But at the same time, I think it's really important to look at the normative side of the existing gender gap. And in doing so, the recommendations and observations from the CEDAW Committee of the UN really helps us understand what the situations are and why these gaps are still rooted. This is the latest analysis, not analysis, but the recommendations from the CEDAW Committee, which was came out in 2016. And if you look at these recommendations, by the way, CEDAW is the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against all forms of discrimination against women. And Japan is the party. Japan has ratified this convention back in 1985. So the Japanese government is in a position to implement what's written in the CEDAW into the national legislation, the policies and social norms and what have you. So the latest recommendations came in 2016, and those are some of them. So if you look at what Japan has been asked to do, there are lots of problems with the current legislation. We have a constitution which guarantees human rights and equality between men and women. And this constitution was put in force, came into force back in 1947. But these laws, the civil code, the penal code, which have a lot of impacts in terms of, our decision-making in lives, or what happens when you are faced with the violence, that kind of things. These civil code and the penal code are really important, very, very, has a lot of impact. And these codes, the civil code and penal code, were developed back in the Meiji era, 150 years ago. And the time when Japan was still under the Dainippon Teikoku Kenpo, the imperial constitution, and the value, the foundation which constitutes the legal framework was the patriarchal values. So all these values are still reflected in the laws which are still active. So a lot of the things which are said by the CEDAW committee to revise and reform and update and really to comply with the human rights aspects. I mean, you know, to meet the human rights conventions, particularly for women. So those are some of the things which are still existing in Japan. But I think you may be aware that the late Prime Minister Abe was really enthusiastic about promoting women in the economy, in society, and what have you. So what did he do? His slogan was a society in which women can shine. And this was sort of came out as part of the Abenomics, the economic policy. And then the women's advancement was seen as a key driver for the growth strategy. So the purpose of this whole policy package was to get more women into labor force and get more women in managerial positions. So it really, you know, came with the economic imperative. So what they have done was to increase the number of childcare facilities for women to balance work and life, and also encouraging the companies to put in place measures targeting women, more, you know, training for women, the reduced working hours and extended maternity leave so that women can balance work and life. And also promoting the paternity leave so that, you know, fathers can take part in that. So what happens after all these vigorous policy measures? The child care places, we had better situations for the child care. And then 2 million women newly entered labor market, you know, between the 2013 and 2016. And then female employment rate has reached 66.1% in 2016. And this was above the OECD average. And paternity leave, the percentage of men taking the paternity leave jumped from 2.6% to 3.2% in 2006. A slight progress, I think. But what happens, lots of challenges actually remained. The pay gap, you know, we had so many women entering the labor force, but most of the jobs were low paid part-time jobs. And so the pay gap still existed. There was no solution, you know, it wasn't resolved. And also the feminization of poverty, it kind of got worsened after 2010. And also the low representation in decision-making positions, still the same situation, not much progress. And also the heavy burden of unpaid care work on women remained. So lots of challenges still remained. These are the, this graph shows that up until when I was younger, there was a full-time wives in the household. So the single income families were the sort of like the mainstream sort of family style. But now the dual income families are the mainstream, but still, while women are working outside, but they are still doing the unpaid care work in the household. So there is no sort of division of labor in terms of, you know, sharing the burden of care and stuff like that. So that remained a big problem. So this is a slide I prepared for my presentation back in 2019. So my analysis at that time was that even though there has been a lot of achievements in terms of having more women in the labor force, a lot of the challenges still remained. And because, you know, those measures were lacking the gender lens. So, you know, having more women, encouraging more women to work, but still, you know, do the household chores and care work in the household, still the same thing for women. So gender role was not resolved, so was not updated. So I think my analysis at that time was that we should not just stay within the realm of, you know, making this just part of the economic issue or women's issue, but really to go beyond and look at this from a gender lens and also from the human rights perspective. And now the policy transformation is happening in Japan. The transition came during the COVID-19 because the COVID-19 impacted women far worse than on men. And so the government set up a high-level experts committee really to look at the differential impacts of the COVID-19 on women. And I was part of this committee. And what was new about this committee was that usually this type of topic, if the government, you know, sets up the experts committee, all of the members could have been like women, and then women like me, who's focusing very much on gender issues. But this high-level committee was consisted of half men and half women, meaning there was a gender balance. And also they invited to be part of the committee, the economists and social scientists, not just rights activists like myself. So that was really good because they started to collect sex disaggregated data and gender statistics to identify the differential impacts of men or women, particularly on the women. And then we had so many economists and social scientists on board at the committee. So they were able to do a thorough analysis. And then we also invited the women's organizations and NGOs to make sure that, you know, we hear the voices of women at the grassroots level and what's really happening on the ground and stuff like that. And then, so combining this gender analysis and the women's, you know, participation through the process, the committee came up with the recommendation. And there were recommendations made in the 4 areas. And basically these really address the gender dynamics, gender power relations, and gender roles and gender norms. And these norms perpetuated in economy, society, and what have you. So finally, we decided, I mean, you know, we were able to address the gender dimensions and also the rights issues. So following up on the recommendations by the experts committee, the Prime Minister Kishida made it very clear that he was going to work on women's economic empowerment, and then really to look at the gender pay gap and the systemic you know, analysis will be done by the government, and to see why these gaps are, you know, happening and stuff like that. And also they have decided to engage more men, and then really to integrate the gender perspective into the policies. So here, the intensive policy for gender equality 2012-2022, this is an annual policy that the government put forward, and this is linked with the budget making process of that fiscal year. So it's really important. And so within the intensive policy, up until then, it was called intensive policy for, like, you know, the women's advancement, but now they changed the name to gender equality, which I think is very good. So now this policy included the legislation for requiring companies to disclose information on gender pay gap, and also to increase wages for jobs in the care sector, which came out very strongly that the women are concentrated in the care sector jobs, but these jobs, the pay was so low, the wages were so low, and then it didn't, so the child care and elderly care, it's a very important work, and it comes with such a high social value, but the pay is so low, so they started to look into that. And also the engaging men and making sure that to sort of develop infrastructures basing on the understanding that dads are also providing cares for their children and stuff like that. So these are some of the initiatives that's happening around the world. I mean, around in Japan, and men to engage more into the care work. And then the change the social norms. We are using the manga for the advocacy and awareness raising, and we are engaging lots of senior men in discussing how to address gender issues. Yes, we do need more work, but changes, I think, are very much happening. There are so many things which are coming its way. And finally, there is a tailwind. Like I said at the beginning, globally, Japan is taking the G7 presidency, and then among the G7 countries, the gender equality is such an important topic, and Japan is in the position to lead the discussion on gender equality as well. So I think government can do more, and there's a political sort of will for that to happen. And also the business sector, sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all this ESG thinking has become such a mainstream, and it's pushing the Japanese companies to do more on gender equality. And nationally, this is, I think, is a very important timing, because the government has finally, I think, understood that the decreasing population is a national crisis. And so now the national diet is in session, and they have been speaking about two main topics. One, the national security, the hard issues, and then two, how to address the decreasing birth rate. I think this is the first time they are really seriously looking into how to increase the number of children. And so I think in not doing that, I think looking at the gender dimensions is really important, because the women stopped having babies because of a lot of the reasons, and one of the reasons is because the heavy burden of care on them and stuff like that. And finally, there is a civil society organizations which are working very hard and really started to influence the changes in legislation and the policies. Particularly, I'd like to highlight the role of the youth organizations who are working on addressing and really to upgrading the legislation, which I talked about when, as part of the CEDAW committee recommendations. So I think I'll stop here for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your very fascinating, interesting presentation. And I have a few comments or questions, but I will mention these after the presentation by our next speaker, Ms. MERITA BLAT. Please, the floor is yours again for about 15 minutes or a little bit more if you need it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
And do you see my screen?
Yes, we do. Yes.
I'm trying to put the presentation in presentation mode. Is it working?
well, we see we see one screen. Yeah.
Is it okay? Perfect. Thank you very much then.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, thanks a lot for the invitation. As you were saying, Valérie, I really think the previous presentation was very interesting. I learned a lot about the situation in Japan. I'm gonna switch to the role of gender equality in France, more applied to France. And I wanted to maybe divide my presentation. I'm just gonna try to move this. It's not very interesting to have it here. So I wanted to divide my presentation in three main axes, just by starting in with a presentation of the French international context on gender equality, then moving more directly to the work we are doing at the Agence Française de Développement. So more coming to the mention of the soft power, as well as to deepen a bit on how we have been developing the specific methodology to further the gender analysis. So starting on the French international context on gender equality, as it was previously mentioned, the work on gender equality is tightly based with the work within the SDGs. The importance, of course, both on working on SDG number 5, as well as working on the gender mainstreaming in the rest of other SDGs. Since 2019, France is a feminist diplomacy, joining the different countries that have now adopted a feminist foreign diplomacy, starting by Sweden in 2014, followed by Canada, Luxembourg, Mexico, Spain, and since last year, Netherlands, Chile, Germany, Colombia, and Argentina. So when we are tackling this importance of gender equality in the French international context, we are at the same time working with different strategies. The first strategy we are working with is the third international strategy on gender equality, which is now finished a few weeks ago. This strategy is in current evaluation by the French autonomous body, which is the High Council on Gender Equality. And there's going to be a fourth strategy handled by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs by the end of 2023. There are as well two other strategies which are very important for the French international context, and by that complementing to what has been said by the previous speaker. The first strategy on population and sexual health and reproductive rights, which is the evaluation stopped and ended in 2022, and the second strategy is gonna be launched in a few weeks by the next March 8th in 2023. And then there's as well the third National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security from 2021 till 2025. So so these are about the three core French strategies. And then I also wanted to mention the importance of the law on 2021 on the programming about development and the fight against global inequalities, which tackles two important measures about the importance of having by 2025 in French development aid, official development aid, 75% of projects dedicated to gender equality or having a component on gender equality. That's how we rate the projects DAC 1 and DAC 2 by OECD. So moving to how the French feminist foreign policy is defined. So it's important to have into account that there's no specific definition yet on how the French feminist foreign policy is defined. Of course, there are multiple values and frameworks. I have been just quoting the three strategies that are a core of our work. and the importance as well of making sure that the idea is to promote a universal feminism against any kind of relativism. And what's as well very important, and I quoted before, the autonomous body of the French High Council on Gender Equality. They issued 2 years ago, in 2021, a report to analyze the French feminist diplomacy. And they included the importance of having a difference between what's a universal vision of gender equality, and it's not the same as uniform. So that means that it's important to make sure that feminism includes diversity of stories, social practices, as well as non-negotiable rights. I also wanted to mention the importance of both of a very important event that happened a few years ago now, the Generation Equality Forum, that was co-hosted by France as well as Mexico, led by UN Women and in close liaison with civil society, which is the Generation Equality Forum. So Generation Equality Forum was developed and handled in order to celebrate the 25 years of the Beijing Declaration for Action in 1995. And it was developed in 6 main action coalitions, which you see in the screen, different themes, which are important pathways in order to obtain gender equality by the next by the end of the agenda of SDGs a few years before. So the importance of making sure that there's a consensus on the fight against gender-based violence, as well as the importance of sexual and reproductive health and rights, justice and economic rights, feminist action for climate justice, and the innovation and technology for gender equality, as well as the importance of feminist movements. The other important part during Generation Equality Forum was the Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action. This led in June 2021 to $40 billion promised by different institutions that were leading in Generation Equality Forum. Just to mention that the main commitments of France were in the Coalition on Sexual Health and Reproductive Rights. Okay, so let's move to a focus on AFD commitment. I just wanted to drive you through how AFD has been committing to the French Development Agency to the feminist as a feminist agency. So of course we follow the different strategies from the French government, and we started our work on gender equality almost 10 years ago with the first gender mainstreaming framework, and since this first framework we have got different strategies, specifically the social link strategy, and of course we are applying the law. And a year after the feminist diplomacy, AFD declared itself as a feminist agency. So how does gender equality framework works inside an institution as AFD? So it was very clearly developed in our first framework in 2013. So it was the importance of making sure that, of course, there is a promotion of gender the prevention for gender inequalities, as well as the promotion of new projects in order to contribute to the improvement of gender in the different societies we are working with. And at the same time, the gender equality vision is tackled as a transversal, the mainstreaming issue applied to all sectors of activity, of course, in all the countries we are working with, and at the same time making sure it is also a specific issue, taking into account any theme that were previously mentioned, just such as, for instance, women economic empowerment, of course, gender-based violence, as well as sexual and reproductive health and rights. How we do develop it within the current social link strategy. I just wanted to focus on the importance of having the 3 main operational goals. So it's essential to have the strengthening of access to essential services, then to strengthen women's economic and social rights, as well as the promotion of women's civil and political rights, parity and leadership in the economy. And then we have two main transversal axes, which are women, peace and security, as well as the promotion of the link between gender and climate. I wanted to have a deeper look on two of our flagship initiatives. So this one, the Feminist Organization Support Fund, is co-led with the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So the fund is the concretization of the engagement of the French President, Mr. Macron, during the G7 presidency of France back in 2019, where there was an important engagement of handling 120 million euros for feminist organization in the global south. So these 120 million have been handled during these past 3 years, from 2020 till 2022. The fund is going to continue this year and the next ones. And the idea is to support activities and structural costs for feminist organizations in the global south, with a priority for initiatives located in Africa, and the importance of making sure that there are specific consultations for CSO during the whole mechanism. So that means that most of we are talking about the 40 million euros per year of funding direct to feminist organizations. Another important initiative for gender equality is the Finance in Common Summit. The Finance in Common Summit has a specific gender coalition with the participation of more than 50 development banks, public development banks. It started back in 2020 during the preparation for Generation Equality Forum, and it has got different priorities within 2021 and 2022. These priorities first were focused on how to measure what is the gender finance around the public development banks, as well as making sure that we have common priorities, both on, for instance, making sure that we develop women economic empowerment, as well as we continue working on the nexus between gender and climate change. And I wanted to quickly introduce the statement, the gender equality statement, and the key objectives of the gender equality statement from the Finance in Common Summit, just by introducing the 4 different objectives. The first one is the importance of the accountability for gender equality. The second focuses on the importance of making sure that there are specific funds for gender equality actions. The third objective is linked to the thematic priority I just previously mentioned about the linkage between climate and biodiversity commitments with gender issues. And finally, the fourth objective is to making sure that when we are working on gender equality, we make sure to establish dialogue with the different actors working on the sector, and more specifically with civil society. This was just very briefly to mention the priorities we have in 2023 on the different themes I have been mentioning. So important to keep the support for feminist CSOs, as well as the development of institutional change via initiatives like gender sensitive budgeting, and at the same time making sure that we continue supporting specific initiatives on sexual health and reproductive rights, gender-based violence, women economic empowerment, women, peace and security, and gender and climate change nexus. About our key results on the development aid. In 2022, we had a goal of making sure of having 100% of projects, including gender equality, which has been succeeded. We had a goal of 55% of our volume, making sure we had a specific gender analysis, a specific or one objective on gender equality. We reached 62%, and we have specific projects on gender equality of 700 million, which we obtained by a few difference of million euros. Very quickly to end the presentation and making sure we have enough time for questions, I wanted to present the methodology we are using to analyze gender equality within the different projects we are funding at the agency. For that, it's very important to keep in mind the importance of gender mainstreaming, and in order to make sure that we take this into account, of course, it's very important to measure and take into account the different gender inequalities, the importance of including a do no harm approach, as well as the importance of making sure that we maximize impact. So we just don't keep at the do no harm, but also we consider the importance of taking into account specific measures in order to maximize and making sure that we reduce gender inequalities. And in order to obtain so, we have agreed with what's called the gender mainstreaming continuum. So it's what's broadly recognized as the difference of a gender blind project, so it doesn't recognize any gender issue, that can become a gender neutral, so that of course avoids to distinguish any targets or beneficiaries or participants by sex or gender, and little by little it becomes a sensitive project, so meeting maybe an immediate or practical need either for men or for women, and finally getting to a gender transformative, so making sure that it meets the strategic needs for men and women and tries to act and transform unequal gender relationships. And finally, and it will be my last two slides, in this sense, it is essential to promote the gender and development approach and not bear solely to the women and development approach. And for that, we try to promote equal rights and equitable sharing of resources between the responsibilities of men and women as well. And for that, we analyze the distribution of roles and activities as well as the roots for gender inequality. And here I just wanted to raise the differences between what's called the women and development approach and gender and development approach. When we focus on the right column with the gender and development approach, of course, we make sure, as I was saying before, that the objective of the project is that we transform power relations between women and men, as well as the access to resources, in order to strengthen women economic and leadership, and making sure that we take into account, as I was mentioning, the needs of women and men to achieve gender equality. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I keep at your disposal for any question.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Also extremely rich and with a lot of inputs, but thank you for that. I do not, there are no, I mean, nobody raised one's hand or put a question or comment, so I will maybe try to launch a debate between you two and myself. First, to Professor Osaki, there is, maybe could you emphasize or develop a little bit about that initiative in Japan called WOW, WOW, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember how you develop the acronym. It's woman.
Wow.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Wow.
And I participated to one of these session, maybe it was before COVID, so quite a long time ago. I think it started again this year in situ. And it is very much focused, of course, on the presentation of on the role of the Agence Française de Développement reminded me of the agenda for WOW. So you are also focusing on helping, trying to contribute to more balance, taking into account gender issues between men and women in the development policy or official development policy of Japan. So could you please present us a little bit more about that initiative in Japan?
Okay, the WOW stands for the World Assembly for Women, and this is an initiative started by the late Prime Minister Abe as one of the his initiatives, and it has been happening since I think 2015. The whole idea is really to provide a place, the venue for women around the world to get together and talk about gender issues and how to go forward and stuff like that. So we have been covering the topics from women, peace and security to climate change and reproductive health and rights and all these, the wide range of issues. And if I may put my observation to this, I think this has been doing a wonderful job in terms of bringing the global discussion and the domestic discussions and the global actors and the domestic, actors together, because I have been listening to Ms. BLAT, and I actually come from the development background as well, because I used to work for UNDP, and I was doing a lot of projects and initiatives in developing countries. And when I came back to Japan, I was still working within the ODA sort of field, helping Japanese government and working with JICA to promote the transition from LEAD approach to GAD approach, gender and development approach. But what happened is that when I was taking part in the recovery and reconstruction efforts in Tohoku, which was hit by tsunami and earthquake, I realized very much that Japan had such a deep-rooted the gender-based problems, and the legislation was so outdated and everything. So my sort of methodology was that to bring in these global norms and the global initiatives and global methodologies and tools, and then get them introduced in Japan to promote the gender equality work in Japan. So that's what's been I have been doing, and that's what the Gender Action Platform has been doing the past 10 years. And so the WOW was the venue really for the Japanese the CSOs, the civil society organizations, and the activists, and for them to meet and be exposed to the global knowledge and experts and initiatives. So I think the WOW has been, doing a lot in terms of bringing, because there was a divide between the international, like policies and programs, the JICA and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whereas, domestically it's a cabinet office, and that was a complete divide. But I think the WOW has been, serving as the venue for bringing them together. So I think a lot now the civil society organizations and also the activists have been exposed to the wide range of methodologies and initiatives, and becoming part of the global network. And that's really pushing, becoming like a driving force for Japan to move forward in terms of gender equality.
Thank you very much. And I'm very glad you brought that necessity to bring together the outside policy and inside policy, because this is what I thought a lot about when I was in Japan. I mean, how you connect both. And I mean, there is not only foreign policy using tools, and then inside Japan there are a lot of issues that need to be tackled too, and it's extremely enriching to put the two together. So now I will relay a question to you, MERITA BLAT, by one of the people watching the webinar about could you please give us a few examples of half-day project or program that had a transformative impact? Actually, is it useful what you do, to put it more bluntly?
Yes, indeed. I wanted maybe to share. I have prepared some of the projects, but wasn't sure I got time to present them. Okay, so normally you're seeing again my screen. Maybe to touch base on one very interesting projects we have working with the government of Morocco. So we are working with a gender sensitive budgeting project since 2018. We have funded again in 2021 the importance of making sure that this gender sensitive budgeting is continued. So we're talking about a loan which supports 7 different Moroccan ministries in the importance of making sure that they identify gender inequalities and implement gender analysis throughout the whole budget chain, either on economic and finance, national education, health, youth and sports, etc., etc. So this is a powerful tool in order to deeply transform the institution, the whole government, in order to make sure that they identify specific inequalities that might be hiding in the different budgets, and making sure that they correct them by a specific gender analysis. So this is one concrete project on institutional change, if you want, that we are very interested in, and we're working with different governments in order to develop it in other countries. And also another project that we think it's very interesting is the grant we held it to the Fondation Pierre Fabre to develop in Bangui in Africa, in Central African Republic, one-stop shop in order to welcome and make sure that all victims of gender-based violence in Bangui will have a holistic approach in order to make sure they have both medical component, psychological access, as well as legal counseling and socioeconomic support in order to make sure that via these 4 holistic aspects, there's a specific center making sure that all victims of gender-based violence in Bangui can access this specific treatment. And what we are as well very interested in, especially in this project, is that it's directly linked to the knowledge that was developed by Dr. Mukwege in DRC. So it is a very completely South-South knowledge, making sure that it applies with the specific, of course, context in the 2 countries, but at the same time making sure that we know how to improve and making sure we continue transforming these societies on this heavy burden of gender-based violence.
Thank you very much. And I have a more general question, but I think it is related to both of you. Someone asked, in the French context, what are the main challenges you are facing in the implementation of the gender agenda? This is, of course, essential. But I think the question also fits to the presentation by Ms. Osaki. As in my view, this is a personal remark. When I spend a lot of time in Japan, and I think one of the issues, and it is also related to private enterprises and not only to government initiative, is a question of stereotypes. For instance, when you look at ads in Japan, you still have a lot of ads but you do not see so much anymore in France, for instance, where the gender stereotype is still extremely strong. You even have this in political ads, for instance, where the image of the wife or woman is very, very traditional, and the man has constantly a much more, traditional role also. So in Japan, I think this is one of the main challenge for me. Like, for instance, in education in Japan, in school clubs, where the divide between roles is still extremely strong. So I would like to have both of you, and it will be our concluding remarks, because we only have 4 minutes, but maybe starting with Professor Osaki, if you can tackle this issue of difficulties or challenges, and then I will give you the floor, MERITA, in order to conclude that webinar. So please, Osaki-san, if you want to start on this issue.
Okay, thank you very much for making a very important point. I think when we work towards gender equality, the one thing we have to do is the legislation, the institutionalizations and the policies, and we have to work on the environment, like the laws and policies and stuff like that, institutionalization. And also it alone cannot work, but it has to go in hand with the working on the social norms. And then that really requires education and awareness raising, and really to work with the schools and also the private sector companies, because the ads, like shape the gender norms and images of people in the country. So, you work with the private sector. And then, so in that context, I'm sitting on the experts committee on promoting gender equality with the government. And so we are working on the legislation right now and the policies. And at the same time, we work with Ministry of the Education to develop the program for teachers to realize and notice the unconscious bias and its impacts on the children in terms of shaping their values and norms. So we can't just targeting children, but it's important to work with adults. So now it's one of the initiatives which has been taking place. So we are doing that, and also we are working with the private sector companies. I think Ms. BLAT may be aware of the women's empowerment principles, which have been, set out by UN Women and UN Global Compact. It's in the guideline for the private sector companies, and more companies are using, the Japanese companies are using this, because this is something that the global investors are looking into in analyzing the performance of the company and the futures of company, stuff like that, from the SDGs and ESG points of view. And WEBs actually encourages the companies to look into their ads, advertisements, and also the products and how they develop products to make sure the gender lens is there in the development of products and services, and also for the advertisement and public relations. So I think more and more people started to realize and actually work beyond just setting up the environment and the policies and programs, but really to work on the social norms.
Thank you very much.
And I think it's really important. They have to go hand in hand.
I think this is an essential issue everywhere, but also in Japan. And so, MERITA, if you want, please to conclude with your own remarks on this question related to France or Europe.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with what was previously said, of course, and it's a global challenge that might be taken into account in all the contexts, and including France, that's for sure. We haven't yet reached gender equality, and even if we are at the 15th position of the global gender gap, it remains a huge challenge. Maybe to focus on the soft power and the international dimension, I strongly believe that it is a challenge to make sure that we get that transformative approach. And even if we are trying to make sure that this is completely taken into account. It is important to measure the impact, the effectiveness, and making sure that transforming social norms is not done in 1 year or in 1 day or in 1 month. It takes a lots of time, and making sure that we convince all the different counterparts in the environment in order to do so. So it's really a tremendous challenge, and this comes as well with a specific backlash that we are seeing in different countries, in different regions, and that are handling in all specific themes I was mentioning before, and more specifically with all that has to do with women's bodies. So the importance of gender-based violence is huge right now, as well as sexual health and reproductive rights. And these are very important themes as well, of course, combined with the importance of funding feminist movements that are now one of our biggest challenges in order to make sure that there are sufficient allies to continue this work on the matter. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So now we reach the end of our last webinar of the Japan program at FRS, and I think it was extremely stimulating and interesting to confront two excellent experts. So thank you to all participants. And as I said, as I mentioned before, you will be able to watch again if you need it, or this webinar on the FRS YouTube channel in a few days. So thank you very much again for your participation, and bye-bye to all of you. Bye-bye.